Hello everyone, my name is Roya, and today I'm coming to you with the books that I read in the first half of December. I did have a lot of books this month, and unfortunately most of them were ranging from pretty much average to slightly above, like the higher end of average reads. So pretty much everything I read except for one thing were like 3 stars or like a weak 4 stars, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about each book. I will, however, start with my best read of the month, which was a 5-star book for me, and that is Liberty's Daughter by Naomi Kritzer. The 4th one of her books that I have read this year, and I have loved the ever-loving crap out of every single one of them. Even the one that was a short story collection, which is not a category of book that I pretty much ever reach for at all, but almost every single story in it made me like want to read a whole book of that story, basically. So I think that she's just such a good storyteller. So this really did not disappoint. It's so good. So it's about a girl who lives on basically what is a series of man-made seasteads. Pretty much it's called the seastead, but really there are different sections of it. The different sections are like made out of different things, like a bunch of ships stuck together or some just man-made islands and stuff. Like it's and basically it's a place with its own kind of societal structure, I guess, where essentially there is no enforcing any rules. Most things that would not be legal in the US are legal there, and it's just a very weird place for people to want to live, and a lot of the people who live there are people who were escaping the US laws for one reason or another. So our main character is a teenage girl who lives there. She's lived there since she was 4, and she has never been back to the States since. And that's really abnormal for people on the seastead. Normally they have been back to the US to get stuff or like whatever it is, because the seastead does not really have its own supply of whatever different items, and there's not a lot of stuff you can necessarily get there, all of that. But so essentially what makes this book so good is that our main character, Beck, is really clever, and she can really like talk herself out of bad situations and everything, out of trouble, and she's really resourceful, and she is like constantly bending the rules and such, and like all this insane stuff keeps happening to her, and the story is just so good. Just Naomi Kritzer just does such a good job of like really introducing enough conflict that makes you keep reading and going, what is going to happen next? And I absolutely love that about her books. I really hope that we get a sequel to this, because even though it tied up the story kind of, it still leaves you kind of going, well, what happens after that, So it was really, really good, and I adored this book. Next, I have For the Wolf and For the Throne by Hannah Whitten. This is a duology about a girl who is the second daughter of the queen, and whenever there is a second daughter of the queen, she gets sacrificed to the woods, basically, in the hopes that the gods that are trapped in the woods will come back. And of course, that has happened many times throughout the centuries, and of course, the gods have not come back. So our first book follows her going into the woods, finding out that this wolf that's supposed to kill her basically is a man, and then meanwhile her sister is trying to get her back, trying to find a way into the woods to allow her to come back, and then the second book basically it follows her sister being trapped in the woods instead. And, so this book is really interesting. It is kind of unique. It has its unique world characteristics and setting and all of that. But overall, I think the weak point of this series is the characters. They are for the most part, they are so general. Especially our 2 main characters of this book in particular. They are so general, they could be anybody. Like, I was really bored reading about these people, and it had nothing to do with the plot necessarily. It was the characters, unfortunately. So I really did think that this book, this series really did have its strong points, but it just didn't quite do it for me. Sunshine by Robin McKinley. This is about a girl who lives in a world where, you know, paranormal happenings are kind of not all that weird, and she meets a vampire, and she has to keep it a secret that she knows this vampire, while also working with an organization that is trying to hunt down paranormal things. So anyway, so this was kind of an interesting book, but Robin McKinley is so hit or miss for me. So there have been books of hers that I've loved and books of hers that I just could not get into, and this was definitely one that I really had to force my way through. I really don't know what it is about Robin McKinley, what it is about her books. There's even one Robin McKinley book in particular that the premise really took me in, and I really wanted to read it. So I tried so hard to read it twice. Not once, but twice, and still could not even get halfway through. So Chalice and the Blade by Ryan Eisler. This is a book that basically talks about gender and, you know, kind of shows examples of different gender roles from early civilizations and such, in a way that, you know, of course shows that gender is so arbitrary and we totally made it up. So this is an interesting book, but it is pretty short and it didn't really give me anything that I didn't know before. So the next three books here are ones that I had the misfortune of reading one after another, and they were all so similarly boring. It's really sad. So obviously fantasy books are my absolute favorite thing to read, and I read them for a couple of different reasons. I mean, I read them because, largely because they provide some kind of commentary on our society. And there's usually some kind of theme to the story that we can kind of relate to. And or, of course, I also read them for a good story, a unique, you know, setting, something that, you know, hasn't been done, because in the fantasy genre, you can do whatever you want. You can use your imagination and come up with whatever you want to. But sometimes I just run into a ton of books that do none of that, and there's just nothing to draw me in. And unfortunately, the next three books here on this list are ones where that was definitely very much the case. So the one that I thought did at least the best job of having an actual story is The Vanished Queen. This is basically about people trying to basically overthrow the evil king. So there are a lot of ways in which that could go, like that could be really interesting, but unfortunately it really was kind of dry. There were a lot of parts where I wanted to care, and like if we had been given more depth to the characters or something would have been, you know, would have made me feel something, because there were some good ideas in here, but I just found myself so disconnected from the story just because it was so general, and we were kind of told how everyone feels in it rather than shown anything. And there's like one instance of magic being used or even really mentioned or anything in the whole book, and it just came out of nowhere, and it seemed like a total convenient plot device. Because overall in this book, magic is not a thing, and then somehow someone happens to do something fancy and magical, and I'm like, where, you know, why? Like, where'd that come from? And that just didn't make a whole lot of sense. And so overall, this book could have been really good, but it was instead a bit weak. City of Lies by Sam Hawke. This was a book that really also fails to have any character depth. It also fails to have any real plot. It was a lot of just talking. This is kind of how the Vanished Queen was as well, but this was a lot more that way. It was a lot of just dialogue and not a lot of on-page action, except for an insane amount of battle scenes. So the only conflict we get is a lot of battle. parts. And unless it's like the end of the book and we are now invested in what's gonna happen, I don't find battle scenes all that entertaining. I feel like if like within the first like 5 chapters we already got a battle scene, a really long battle scene, and I'm like, I don't even know who these people are at this point. Why do I care about this long fight between like these people and these people? I don't get it. So unfortunately, this book was super boring and I just had to like force my way through it. And I felt very similarly about There Will Come a Darkness. This was a book that kind of, I mean, we have multiple point of view characters and they were not different enough from each other. And so I actually started kind of forgetting which one was which. And there was, similarly to City of Lies, there was just a lot of just talking and not a whole lot of stuff happening to the people on page until more towards the end of the book. So I was just really bored. A Taste of Golden Iron by Alexandra Rowland. This is a book that I kind of felt similarly about as well, in that it's just really slow and we didn't get as much like on page conflict. It was a lot of talking, but it did start having a lot more, it did actually have a lot more conflict on page. It was still a lot of just dialogue, but it did kind of redeem itself. It basically, so this is a story about a prince and his bodyguard falling in love, and it is a really good, the romance is really, really good, but unfortunately it took forever to get there. A lot of the book was just a lot of political intrigue happening, and so it was just a lot of talking and a lot of, okay, is there an actual story in here somewhere, and all of that. But overall, so unfortunately it was just a gigantic bummer that I read this right after I read those 3 books that I just talked about, but this was definitely still a step above those ones. It definitely worked a lot better. It was just a lot slower and had less to do with the romance than I had thought it was going to be, and it was really hard to get into at the beginning. It really took its sweet time getting to any actual story. And then the last book that I read this month is A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court by Mark Twain. It just kind of randomly occurred to me that I had not read this book, so I felt like I should really just give it a whirl, and I didn't enjoy it as much as I thought that I would. It's basically, about a dude from, like a modern day guy, hits his head, winds up in King Arthur's court, all of that. And so it was actually pretty interesting in that it really showed just how awful the Middle Ages or any medieval-esque world kind of is, in that there's a lot of enslavement, there's a lot of just like peasants just working all day to the point where they like don't care about anything anymore. Like it really showed like the dark side of the Middle Ages that we don't typically get in like a fantasy book or anything. But overall I thought it could have been better. It was, it was pretty boring, and I mean, I know classics are kind of like that sometimes, but I don't know, I didn't like it that much. It was just okay. So anyway, those are the books that I read in the first half of December. So thank you guys so much for sticking around for my whole talk here, and I hope to see you guys very soon with a new video. Bye!